right. Thanks everyone for coming to our webinar, and it's so nice to kind of get ramping back up again for the fall. And so today is using events and festivals to build your food business. Today we'll be with Mark Ray, co-owner of Stowe Cider, and Whitney, Lamy, board president of Vermont Specialty Food, and also founder of Castleton Crackers. Whitney, why don't you, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can go, you can take over here basically. Can you?
Okay. Well, I really will talk first as the founder of Castleton Crackers, which I started 10 years ago in 2008. And thinking back over the years and all the different types of in-store demos and farmers markets and trade shows, both regionally and nationally, I really strongly believe if you're a new producer or vendor in local farmers markets. That was where I really launched Castleton Crackers back in 2008 at the Rutland Winter Farmers Market. And I found at that time, I don't know what it costs to join a farmer's market today, but back then it was $25. And to me, it was just one of the best marketing tools and the best money I could use to invest in building my brand. Because for that $25, you would go to your farmer's market every week. You'd see if you were getting repeat customers. You would get feedback directly on your product, on the price point, on the flavor, on the overall logistics of making a product as it grows, and then even feedback on packaging. So I really always tell people that are just starting out to really look at investing in their local farmers markets and using that time to do their research. And there's no better way on a weekly basis to get that customer feedback. Also, I think it's really important to look at and visit other farmers markets, look and go to stores that have in-store demos and see what other vendors and producers are doing as far as table design, as far as giving out samples, and really just kind of, check out what the other guy's doing and take notes. I think it's really important at some point later on the webinar we can talk about is what your table or your booth design looks like and how you tell your story through that image of your first connection to customers. So farmers markets, doing in-store demos, many times you're going to have the same kind of tables set up and sampling opportunities at smaller trade shows or farmers markets. So those were some of the things when I first started out with Castleton Crackers, was doing the farmers market as the company grew, doing the in-store demos, and then looking at what my budget was to kind of get to the next step. One of the first sort of bigger shows I joined into was the Vermont Cheesemakers Festival. And I was there the first year it opened. And obviously being a cracker company, it was a natural fit. So just really researching different opportunities at the Vermont Cheesemakers Festival that not only support your brand and your product, but also really look at shows that are going to expose your company. I mean, there's no better investment than getting out there in front of people, whether it's an in-store demo, whether it's a trade show, whether it's a local festival. I think always at the back of your mind, you have to be thinking, how can I build my brand and get the most exposure?
I have a question. Basically, I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about your work with the Vermont Specialty Food Association and how that comes into play?
Sure. So as a new food producer back in 2008, and as the company started to grow, I found myself really sort of wanting peer support and finding a resource where I could ask other people in the specialty food world in Vermont questions. Around 2009, I heard about the Vermont Specialty Food Association. So I felt, as a small business owner, a new business owner that was growing fairly quickly, that it was a wonderful use of my money to join as a member. So it's been a wonderful organization as far as the resources available. You have, new producers like I was, to larger companies like Vermont Smoke and Cure, Lake Champlain Chocolates. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. I
Okay.
was thinking.
So that was really a wealth of information for me, and such a great investment of my dollars to join as a member. And then over the years, just being part of the organization led me to being on the board, and then board president.
Just regarding events and festivals, and we go back to that just for a moment. How would you say, if we're talking Castleton Crackers for a moment, well, we'll be talking that for a while, I guess. But how your participation changed from when you started, you said farmers markets, to what you would later on do, basically. How did the company change, or how did you think about changing, your experience at events and things?
Yeah, you really have to think visually. Whether it's the farmer's market or the fancy food show in New York or San Francisco, different venues allow for different types of booth setup. For example, at a farmer's market, are you able to put signage behind you? Fancy food show, bigger trade shows, that's usually the case. So you have to be thinking on a bigger scale visually. I think you also have to remember that depending on the size of the show, and it can even be a busy farmer's market, or the Vermont Cheesemaker Festival gets thousands of people. So you have to keep that in mind, that you have such traffic and such flow of visitors and potential customers. Is how are you going to stand out, or how are you going to make your brand known? So a lot of what you might do at a farmer's market or a local festival can translate into a larger trade show. The larger the trade show, the more signage, the more professional that might look. It's certainly a dollar investment. And you want to create signage and booth materials or table materials that can move from one venue to another, so you're not like having 10 different boxes of stuff that goes from one to the other.
Yeah. Okay. We'll continue on more about this after, but why don't we talk to Mark and have Mark talk a little bit about Stowe Cider. I think you're on mute right now, Mark, and if you want to share screens and show us what you
All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Gray, owner of Stowe Cider, and I also serve on the Cider Makers Association. So quite a bit of experience with events in this industry, and I think Whitney hit a lot of the points I wanted to mention, and all valid ones. I think I'll expand on that, I guess, a little bit, because I think our industries are slightly different. We're both in food, I guess, to a degree, but right now, the craft beer or craft beverage scene is inundated with festivals and requests, and so it's a real challenge to decide, which events are going to be a good fit for your brand. And so when you're looking at that, there's a lot of things you really kind of need to consider. For us, fortunately, when we do a lot of events, the event organizer will purchase our product. So that's one of the big questions we ask right off the bat. Are you gonna pay for it? And that gets us to that event. pretty quickly. The return on investment, if somebody else is paying, we obviously have to pay time and travel and have the materials to support the event. But if they're going to buy the event and there's a lot of attendees, they're probably going to buy quite a bit of product, which makes that decision easy if you have the staff. Whereas there's a lot of events that are expecting donations or a fee to have a booth, and those obviously then raise the question, are you going to get a return on that investment? So I've got a couple pictures here. I mean, as Whitney had mentioned, it's very important to push your branding. Here's a shot here at the Stowe Brewers Fest a couple of years back of what kind of our larger festival setup looks like. You'll see logos abound there. We're definitely getting the branding out there. The big thing for us at Stowe Cider is have fun. Make things a little bit different and try to attract people to your booth. Obviously, there's a lot of beer and a lot of cider there, but what makes you different? Why should people come to your booth or try your product? And I think that's because we're trying to have the most fun. You can see that here. Abby's definitely dancing and having a good time. We've got some cornhole, probably the only ones there that had an activity, so it brought people over to play some games. It didn't really cost us that much to get the boards, and we use them all the time, but it was something different. You'll see a Frisbee on the ground. There's a disco ball hanging up above there. And it's just continuing to try to elevate, your setup and just, I guess, let loose a little bit and have fun with it. That's kind of what's gotten us to this point.
It's kind of like a party. Your booth is like a party with the ball and the cornhole.
It is. We've got some other ones here. If my browser will cooperate. There's another shot of some guys at a similar festival, similar style. This is a Renaissance festival. We still keep the branding true, but, dress the part. So think about the demographic in the audience, get involved with it. And again, keep it fun. If you show up in, a hooded sweatshirt or your standard t-shirt or polo shirt, like you're at a sales at a Renaissance festival, you're not really fitting in to the vibe or the audience. So I think it's really important to kind of consider, where you're going to be and who those people are and try to connect with them on a little bit more of a personal level. You'll see a lot of our product is put in cans, fun, bright colors. But, we do have other SKUs, that fit a different demographic. And so this is an example of a setup at King Arthur Flour, where we decided to go glass bottles. I think it was near Thanksgiving, pushing a different market. So, the other ones were pushing cans, volumes, I guess you could say kind of the party, but keep it responsible. Whereas here, we knew that the demographic at King Arthur Flour was more likely to be that would be interested in a single serving, something they could share with their, baked goods that they were going to be having that night that they were able to purchase at King Arthur that day, or bring home for Thanksgiving. So again, I think it's all very important to consider your audience. And Tara, we were speaking about that, and we spend hours sometimes in a week going back and forth about how we want our setup to look at a certain event, because that's your first impression. That's the first time you get in front of a lot of your consumers, and if you don't get it right, you don't get that chance back.
Well, how do you decide which events to participate in? Like, how many do you have over a year now compared to when you started? And how did you really focus that conversation? Because as you were saying, there's a lot of events every year, music festivals or anything, or King Arthur Flour setups. How did you, has your view of festivals and events, this sort of thing, changed over the years? Or how do you go about thinking about it?
Well, I mean, certainly, with growth, you have the opportunity to participate more, because hopefully you've got more employees and more capital to work with to be able to participate in more events. And it does get hard because there's, in the summer, there's 4, 5, 6 festival invites in one weekend, and you can't really justify having a staff that size just for events. then you kind of become an event company and lose sight of the focus of, directing your efforts towards. I think it's just important to, it's quality over quantity, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And, for us, and I think, I was watching the webinar earlier from the lady at 14 Star, and I think she nailed it when she was talking about building her brand. And, for us, it was always most important to take care of home base, and still to this day, everybody knows us in Stowe or Central Vermont or Northern Vermont or even Vermont in general at this point. But we still pick Vermont first. We want to grow our sales and our relationships with our community and participate in the events that have impact where we all live and work and, kind of be a part of the community. That's first and foremost for us.
Okay, so do you have some other setups you want to show, or?
No, that was it. Just a couple there.
So I'm going to just take back the screen for a second, and we talked about events. Whitney, how did you decide how many events that you would go to on a yearly basis when you were with Castleton Crackers, or how would you, think about audience and events?
Well, like Mark said, it depends on, the capital, the marketing dollars you have and the staff that you have to attend events. Starting off at the farmers market, I could have chose to do 10 to 12 farmers markets and send staff around the state. I just didn't have the budget to do that. But I think for me, it was really important as a Vermont product to start local, build the brand, and then not only in Rutland County, but build a presence in Vermont. So that's what was important in choosing with events and shows to do. I know other companies that just really kind of look, I want a national presence or a regional presence when they're not starting at home first and really building that Vermont brand within Vermont. So that being said, it's just what your budget and your staff can afford. If you can afford to do as many festivals as you can, go for it. But I think picking and choosing maybe regionally to build your brand in different regions of Vermont. So do you have much of a presence in the Brattleboro area? Do you have much of a presence in the Montpelier or Burlington area, et cetera? And looking into those regions for what opportunities there are for shows.
Have you ever picked an event or a festival and it was just the wrong choice?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah. Have you ever participated in a festival, event, fair, and it was just like the wrong choice? It did not go well. And it was there, and you were like, oh, I shouldn't do this next year. Or if I had done this, it would have been different.
Right. Absolutely. And that's part of the game is you hit or miss. And, Mark can probably talk to this too. Some of the events I've done where alcohol is served, I'm not sure how much the customers remember my brand, so to speak. That's not always the case, but I've done some wine festivals where, the brand really isn't standing out as I had hoped it would. So I think it's, looking at the demographic of the customers that are attending these festivals. Certainly festivals within Vermont are going to draw people from out of state, which is always good because you are building more brand awareness. But it's definitely hit or miss. But I think it's important to think in terms of festivals or events that have complementary products or focus, so that as a cracker company, maybe certain wine festivals or cider festivals or beer festivals are good because there's probably going to be cheese there, and then you need a cracker vehicle. Obviously, the Vermont Cheesemakers Festival is a win-win for a cracker company. So looking at different opportunities that maybe not are specific to your brand or your product, but would complement. So that's just another way to enter.
And Mark, what about you? Have you
I
ever?
think Whitney just nailed it. I mean, one example that comes to mind really quickly is, we have a lot of success at music festivals. Music and alcohol seem to go pretty well together. We've tried a couple dinner theaters, didn't go as well. You're just not going to see, people are more focused on the show. It's not as, that's just one example, that comes to mind. We did a whole series. We said, it's going to be a home run. And unfortunately, it wasn't. And so we won't be doing that one again.
So let me just go on here. But so when we talk about events, and Stowe Cider has quite a product line, and Whitney, with Castleton Crackers, you had a certain set of products, so you probably brought all of them with you to your event, your product line. But Mark, would you say that the event, the festival, or whatever you're taking will you'll match the product with the event, or?
Definitely. Obviously, with any business, there's certain products that are new that you're trying to push, but, it's important to take a step back and not just, push what you want to because you've got inventory or because it's new. You really got to think about whether it's going to be a good fit for the audience. Seasonal items, summers, we have stuff with lemonade. So those are obvious, but yeah, it's about quality over quantity, and it gets a little overwhelming for the consumer if you have too many options and they get to taste, they either burn out their palates or they forget by the time they've tried, they're on their fourth sample, they don't remember what the first one tasted like. And there's, so many other vendors and samples that they're taking that, I think what we try to focus on is having a couple really solid choices and being able to really explain them well and educate the consumer. You obviously want to pick your hero, the rock star, and hope that you can catch them that way and that they're going to visit your website, your tasting room, or, go and purchase and make a new purchase at the store based on the experience they had at the festival.
And clearly on screen I've got product communication or goals. So you have certain products, you have a certain number. You said you're a rock star, and maybe like a new one or different one or something for people to try that's a little different. So when you're talking to customers, and I guess it's about your product, communication, of course, you're talking communication, but how do you speak about your product differently at, let's say, King Arthur Flower versus a music festival?
I think it's...
Or does it change,
It does. It certainly does. I think anytime you talk to somebody, you're trying to level with them and speak in a language and communicate in a way that they're going to understand the best. And, there's certain, lingo or, vocabulary used with different demographics of people. And I think it's really important to think about that and think about the representative you're sending to each festival and event and make sure that they're going to fit in with that audience. It's very different, if we're going down to King Arthur, again, we're focusing maybe a little bit more. We treat it a little bit more wine, a little more serious, and how it's going to pair with food. People are at King Arthur because they're hungry. They want to eat. They want to snack, and they want to know that cider is going to pair well with the food. Whereas you go to some of these beer festivals or cider festivals with a younger generation and a younger demographic, they want to know that it's sessionable, how many they can have, what the calorie intake is going to be, and your sugar. And so you've got fitness and drinkability or food pairings, and those are often different demographics of people.
Yeah. So, Whitney, since, crackers, people can eat crackers, just have crackers, but sometimes they'll pair them with cheese or,
chutneys. Yeah.
So do you ever partner up with, would you ever, or in the past, had you ever partnered up with another brand at a festival and say, okay, we're going to share this table? And how does that process go? Or how do you initiate that?
Absolutely. I'm a really big believer in collaborating and supporting each other's brands, especially if they complement. So exactly what you said. There's been many events I've done before I joined Vermont Farmstead Cheese Company, where I would pair the crackers with cheese, another Vermont cheese company. I think I had an image up where we were making Vermont s'mores with Vermont creamery drizzled with Fat Toad Farm caramel. So doing those types of collaboration gives, I believe, more brand exposure. So at my table, if I'm using cheese or a caramel or a local chutney, then I would display those products and vice versa. So Fat Toad Farm caramel would have boxes of Castleton Crackers. So when you think about it, that's more exposure for your brand as a person travels through, whether it's a festival or a trade show or an event, because they're going to say, oh, I just tried those crackers over there. Oh, this is a cool use of them. So I really, as I said, believe in collaborating wherever you can and trying to, maybe kind of make really unique pairings that people might not have thought of. So even with a cider like Stowe cider, to have a really great Grafton cheese with my salted maple cracker paired with a Stowe cider, certain things like that. I think it only enhances your product and then just gives people really great ideas to use it.
Oh, yeah. And I want to remind everyone who's listening and who's on the webinar, if you have any questions, please just enter them into the chat window. We want to hear the things that you're interested in, or if you have questions and stories and things like that. So I just want to mention that. So if we are, talking about, well, let me go back to collaboration for a second. Mark, does Stowe Cider ever do any collabs, with other brands?
If you ask my staff, maybe too many. We actually
I can send you crackers.
Yeah, we actually just released what we're calling the Juniper Sessions. We teamed up with 11 different distilleries around the Northeast and used their spent gin botanicals to flavor our cider. So we use the same base cider. We take the botanicals out of the still when they're done making their gin and infuse it into our cider. And so we released all 11 just about at the same time, just so folks could try them side by side and see how they, the flavors, come out differently with each cider and how the botanicals are different. And it's been really interesting. We actually have all 11 on draft in our tasting room now. This weekend, some friends of mine who play in a band out in LA are coming to town. So we did a collaboration with them. We did a collaboration with Twiddle, who's a local Vermont band. So yeah, we've done quite a few, and I think we're going to continue. We see huge success. Our Instagram has just been blowing up the last couple of days, just because we're reaching an audience we wouldn't have otherwise. They shared a photo of us, we shared a photo of them. It's win-win, doesn't cost anything, and it's kind of organic word of mouth. And I attribute a lot of our success to our events and our collaborations.
Okay, great.
I would just add, if I could for a second, and I don't know how Mark would do this, but being a cracker company, another way for me to get my brand in front of people and potential customers and not have to physically invest in being at a certain show, a festival, is I would donate Castleton Crackers, for example, to Grafton Village Cheese or other cheese companies that were out and about doing events. And that way, in exchange for the free product, they would put signage and my packaging out. So that's just another way to get great exposure for very little investment, but a big return, I believe.
Yeah. So leading up to an event, what's your pre-production like? What is your timeline? Whitney, what would you say is the most important thing?
leading up to an event, basically.
Yeah. So let's say you were going up to a festival, you go into a festival or fair, like, and not necessarily a farmer's market, but just like a craft fair or a cheese fest. I'm sure there must have been a timeline, basically, of what you needed to do and your process there. How did you get the word out, basically?
Well, I think today with the social media, it's just a no-brainer to start. Probably, I would say, not much more than several weeks. I think we're such an instant society today that you don't want to start promoting your event maybe too far in advance. But certainly through Instagram and Facebook and all the other resources to promote events is very important as part of your marketing plan around an event or a festival or a trade show. Also, I'm a really big believer in trying to get free press, so sending out to local newspapers, maybe statewide or in the area of where the festival or event is going to be, saying that you're going to be there. People are, print media or even online media is always looking or has a calendar section. I think also you have to, it sounds silly, but how many people are going? What is the number of attendees at this event and how many staff do you need to manage your table? Mark can probably talk to that too. Can you do it by yourself? Is 2 people enough? Do you need more? And then if it's something where you're going to take your car, can you fit everything you need in your car? As simple as that. Can you fit your product and your table and all the paraphernalia that goes with setting up your booth or table into your car? I think one of the hardest parts of doing any event for me was how much product to bring. And Mark, you can probably talk to that. Some I would bring like way too much, thinking it was just going to be a sellout if it was a selling event. So there are 2 different types of events. One where you're selling your product, and then more of a trade show where you're just sampling your product, whether it's a distributor trade show or a food trade show or cider association, whatever. So that, there's a distinction between those 2 and how much product you need to bring.
Yeah. And Mark, I would think that, a music festival, that's different, how much product to bring there. We talked about maybe bringing your product line and just having a few choices, but I would think the amount of people at an event would affect how much product you bring, right?
It does. I think our situation is a little bit different because the majority of our business goes through a wholesaler. And, we're to the point where we don't self-distribute because we're too large. And so more often than not, actually 99% of the time, the festivals, music festivals, concerts, whatever it is, has to purchase through our wholesaler. And there's actually, they're allowed to return the product if it's unopened.
Oh, wow.
So, you can work out contracts that say, all right, yeah, we'll commit, but you commit to purchasing X amount of product. That makes it worthwhile. Anything, then they'll bring in double, and then they can always return the unopened product.
And so in the lead up to events that Stowe Cider participates in, clearly your Instagram, you use Instagram to kind of build awareness and just kind of amplify whatever's out there about that event. How does the event manager or the festival, whoever's running the event, how does they come into play in regards to promotion for, their vendors, for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of how we decide if we want to be involved or not is, are they organized? Do they present the festival well? Because, when we join a festival, we're kind of underneath them. And so if they're disorganized or have a kind of a sloppy setup or unorganized, then, it kind of reflects poorly on all the vendors or, folks who are out there sharing their product. So, we're conscious of that as well.
Yeah. And then
I think if I could just add in, Mark probably has this with the Cider Association. That's one great thing about the Vermont Specialty Food Association is any member can post a question to the listserv. So for example, if I'm going to consider doing a Made in New England event that's twice a year, one in Maine and one in Sturbridge, Mass, I can post that question to the listserv and ask for feedback on people that have done it, if they had a positive experience, if they've done it more than once, why not. So it's really talking to people that have maybe done something that you're considering before and really getting a good take on, was the entry fee or the booth fee or the table fee worth the investment?
Same with Vermont Fresh Network, right? That's for
It's the
people.
beauty of being a part of associations.
Yeah, right. And it's that support and since especially I would think the cider makers of Vermont, it's a smaller group. We were talking about that, and it's still growing. And I would think that support is very, very important for that cider community, basically.
It is, yeah. I mean, and it's a young industry, so we're all learning together and giving each other feedback on how things have gone, and we attribute a lot of the growth to the people that came before us. And so I think what do they say? A rising tide raises all ships, and I think it's really important to network and bond together with people in your industry.
So, let's talk about after an event, like that post-event time. Do you do whether it be like set up and having a meeting? Do you do some sort of post-mortem, whether casual or actually scheduled, or what? How does that work for you?
We do. Yeah. I mean, we try to meet on a regular basis, but we have a form that we fill out every single time because, 365 days go by and you say, wait, was that good? Was it bad? How much did we sell? And, was it worth it? I mean, that's it. Was it worth it? And, that's the first question, really. Was it worth it? Yes or no? And people are pretty quick to respond. But as a manager and owner, sometimes you have to dissect it because if anybody who's worked or had employees, everybody's got a different mindset on what's worth it or not. And your employee might not necessarily always have the final say. I mean, you have to dissect it. So certainly just get it all down on paper.
Yeah, like what worked that you can use for next time, and then what didn't work, we're not doing that again, or things, right? Things that would help you.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have an employee who says, well, I didn't really sell that much. And, I've gone to certain shows or events and maybe not sold that much, but made some really good connections and had some positive interaction. And maybe it was more educational. And I believe that those folks then probably went and followed us on social media or came to our tasting room, and maybe the event wasn't really set up as much for purchasing as it was for, samples. And sometimes the employee might not make that connection the way an owner or manager would. So, yeah.
And Whitney, would you say when you participated in events, would you ever set up certain goals? Like, I'm going to do this and this and this, and this is my goal at the end of this experience, whether it be more education or more followers, or, how does that?
I mean, I think everything you do, as a business owner has a goal, and, sometimes it's just basically exposing of your brand is the number one of the list. And I do believe that there's certain industry shows that pertain to your product that are worth investing in, and that maybe the first time or the second time out, you don't see quite as much of a return. But I think you always have to believe that it's being there and showing up and having that consistency of exposing your brand. So one example, as I've used before, is the Fancy Food Show, which is in New York City in June, and then they have a winter Fancy Food Show in San Francisco. It's a huge investment to take out a booth. And, you know, when all is said and done, and travel and staffing and booth presentations, you know, you can spend easily $10,000 for a three-day event. What I've learned is you can still get that exposure if you're creative. And one of the creative ways we've just used big events like that without spending the money is looking at your distributor base. So for example, a fancy food show, there might be 4 or 5 distributors already in big booths at that fancy food show. So rather than Castleton Crackers taking out one booth, how about I sign up and have staff and we sample at 4 or 5 different booths? And that does have a fee with it, but it's much less expensive. And as I mentioned earlier, does that give you more exposure to your brand than being in just one location and one spot? That's just one way of looking at attending some trade shows in your field. Is there ways that you can connect with either other products that maybe want to share a table or a booth so you don't incur the whole fee? Fancy Food Show has a Vermont section, and I know that there's companies that will share a booth so they can offset some of the cost of going there and doing that. So I think it's just kind of looking outside of what is traditional and how can you collaborate, how can you share space, how can you approach a bigger, costly show by getting a lot of exposure rather than doing just a traditional table or booth.
Sure. And Mark, when you, in Stowe Cider, you know, when you want to get out of Vermont and you know, basically get out there, you know, we were talking about national, you know, fancy food show, but what sort of events do you look at out of state, basically, that you know, tastings at, whether it be local stores, or how do you look at that sort of participation?
Yeah, you know, as a company, we're in a little bit of an awkward stage. We're not to the point where we're hiring sales reps out of state. We actually don't really even have a full-time sales rep in state. I attribute all of our success really to events. That being said, we will make sales calls to team up. So try to make it worthwhile because a tasting to go down, you know, drive to Boston, get a hotel room, pay for food just to do a tasting in a store where you might end up only having 20 people sample your product, you know, just really isn't worth it. I'd like to, you know, continue to focus here in state with that kind of commitment. If we are going to do something, it's going to be a festival. It's going to be something that's kind of guaranteed, you know, if we're going to make that commitment.
Like a music festival or that.
Or a beer festival, spirits festival, food festival, you know, something, you know, where there's, you know, tangible agreements in advance.
Of course, yeah. Okay, so let me come up on, let me see here. Hold on, just trying to pull my screen up here. So follow up. Oh yeah, now here's my question. So let's just talk about follow-up and like after an event. And while, you know, during the event, whether they're tasting or, you know, you're chatting and educating, you want those people to, whether it be follow you on Instagram and of course, stop by the tasting room or buy the crackers. What sort of follow-up, or how do you look at that basically? You know, perhaps whether it be email marketing, or how do you look at that sort of experience? Like to keep those connections, I guess. Is it just going to that festival again? Is it, or how do you look at that? Whitney, perhaps you can.
Yeah, I think it depends on, you know, what type of show it is. But I think also you have to think about, are you giving a takeaway to that customer that's going by, whether it's your business card or a little sample bag. One thing that I used to do at Fancy Food Show is actually take my packaging, which is flat before it's open, and stick my business card and my sell sheet in it so that I'm actually giving the packaging to a potential customer, which I got really great feedback because they're going to remember what my product looked like because they have the box.
Yeah.
So thinking about what are you going to give away to make that person or that potential customer remember your product. You also, from the other side, want to collect as many names and business cards as you can. I always keep a notebook, and if time allows, try to jot down who I talked to and if they want samples set or they want an email after that, depending on the show. Obviously, that can even happen at a farmer's market. You might get a retail buyer from Hunger Mountain Co-op or Healthy Living at a farmer's market that's, you never know, and just be ready. If that was the case, if I was at a farmer's market and a potential buyer came out, I did not hesitate to give away a box of my crackers for them to take. So I also think you have to feel that you're behind your product and you want to be generous. So when it's an opportunity, don't hesitate to give your product away to a potential buyer or someone that's really, going to make a difference possibly in a sale.
Yeah. And, okay, so we're coming up towards the end here of our hour. I'm going to just once again put out there for people who are participating, if you have any questions, please post it in the chat box. Because we'd love to hear any questions and answer them, of course. Mark, while we're waiting in to see if anyone has questions, what are your final thoughts? What are there just certain things that you're like, oh, we always do this, or here's something we learned and we will never go back to not doing it? Is there anything like that, or if there's any advice?
Two things I would say is I kind of lead it off with have fun with it, just own it. And also don't do it alone, because I think the biggest thing about events, and we spoke about demographics a little bit and audiences, your mindset and thoughts are just yours. And the more people you can bounce ideas off of and get some feedback, before making decisions, I find that very valuable. We do everything on a collaborative basis here in the office. And I've been proven wrong once or twice, even by my employees. Yeah. I'm not afraid to admit it. That's why we build the team we have here. And it's really important to get as many people in the room to discuss. And even, folks, our production guys and gals, I like to get them out for events. I think it's helped build the brand. And it's really important for everybody to connect with, the customer.
And we didn't really talk about this, but I would also think that you must learn a lot about just products and tasting and what people are liking, or what they're, just as like kind of customer survey, basically, what they're tasting.
Yeah, I mean, for us, people come into our building in our tasting room and they're quite nice. Most of the time, if they don't care for it, they'll say, "Ooh, that's interesting," or "That's different." But when you go to events, I feel like people are a little bit more honest. At least in our experience, people are brutally honest, or you can see them walk a few feet away and say to their friend, maybe after they've had a couple beverages, they're not quite as quiet as they think they are. And so you tend to pick up some pretty honest feedback at events that you don't when you're a guest in somebody else's house.
Well, I'm sure that when they like it, they really like it, though.
They do. Oh, yeah.
And Whitney, do you have it? What are your last, thoughts here, basically, about any advice or, just definite truths to this sort of participation?
Couple of things. One, I think you have to sort of stand in the shoes of the customer that's coming to whatever event you're presenting at. Because most of the times they're overstimulated. So if your festival or your event, whatever the space may be, you're not the only vendor. So they're being overstimulated by products and tastings and all of that. So keeping that in mind, coming back to what does your table look like? Mark showed some great images where the first thing I thought is less is more. It was simple. His brand stood out. And I think you have to really keep that visual foremost as to how you're presenting your product and telling your story. you want people that are upbeat and positive sampling your product. You don't want people that are not personable and don't like to interact. You really, you're selling your story. And I think it's just, really believing in your product. And if you believe in your product and your staff believes in your product, then that energy comes across. But also just, really remembering that people are trying and tasting a lot of different products.
Yeah, sure. And, and it seems to me from what you were saying just now and what Mark had been saying previously with those images, when people come to your booth, it's almost kind of a step. I was thinking about Stowe Cider, but like it's a step into Stowe Cider, basically. That booth, that experience, it's part of the brand, but people should feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like as if they're stepping into the tasting room. People, that's it. It's yours is different from any other place, basically. Mark, am I correct in that, or?
Oh, 100%. You try to be unique and tell your story, and educate. As Whitney said, you want to make sure that your staff is incredibly knowledgeable and passionate. That's the first. You'd be surprised. We've gone through quite a few interviews. If folks will say, "I don't really care for cider that much," and it's okay, next. It's the ones that come in and know your product line and. The ones that are teaching you at the same time, because they're just they're hungry and excited about the industry and your product, and those are the people you want on your front line, which is advanced.
And buy-in, like they believe, if you have a good product and you believe in your product. So if you, it's, I would think, and even if it's an employee speaking about your product, if they like it and they have buy-in and they're passionately talking about it, and they're like, oh, you need to taste this right here, that's infectious, basically, right?
Exactly.
I would think anyway. So okay, so we're gonna wrap up here. I'm gonna share screens again just to give everyone a look at what's going on. But I want to just thank you both so much for participating here and just chatting about your experience. I know I learned a lot. So like I said, thank you so much. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
All right. So, let me see here. So here we go. Let me pull up my screen again. So anyway, we talked about final thoughts. We have our next webinar is coming up in a few weeks, website planning for food and farms, which will be quite interesting. About visuals and content and what works best with Kelly Mechanic from Flavor Plate. So I'm excited about that one. And then I guess the next thing is if anyone needs information on Vermont Fresh Network membership, check out our website. Or if you have any questions, please shoot us an email. But also the video of this webinar will be up on Vermont Fresh, as will resources about event participation and information. So anyway, thank you all. And I look forward to next time. But like I said, thanks again, Mark and Whitney. It was really fantastic. I appreciate it.
Can I make a quick plug?
Of course.
Yeah, I just want to make a plug for the Vermont Specialty Food Association. Our fall meeting is next Wednesday, November 7th in Burlington. If you are interested, even if you're not a member, you can come and attend, and just go to the Vermont Specialty Food Association website and it'll have all information. We have a great lineup of speakers and it's really fun and delicious.
Great. And I will also say, so people should check out Stowe Cider, right? For the tasting room, that sort of stuff. And you guys have Cider Week coming up next week. And I mean, not next week, excuse me, next year. You have Vermont Cider Week. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. Anyway, thank you. Thanks again. And until next time.
Drink more cider, eat more crackers.
That's a good plan. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.